Sarah Matthews had hidden her Navy past for 6 years. Nobody on Flight 1842 knew she'd flown fighter jets off aircraft carriers. Then the plane's nose dropped hard. They were falling from the sky. The pilots couldn't stop it. 189 people screamed as death rushed toward them. Sarah stood up and walked to the cockpit. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Sarah Matthews sat in seat 23C, staring out at the clouds below. The flight attendant had just passed by with drinks, and Sarah had politely declined. She didn't like drawing attention to herself. Not anymore. The man next to her was sleeping, his head tilted back, mouth slightly open. Across the aisle, a young mother was trying to calm a fussy baby. Behind her, 2 businessmen discussed quarterly earnings. Normal. Everything was beautifully, perfectly normal. Sarah was 38 years old and worked as an accountant at a small firm in Denver. She lived in a modest apartment, drove a used Toyota, and spent her weekends hiking or reading. Her co-workers knew almost nothing about her life before she joined the firm 6 years ago. They knew she'd done some government work before accounting. That was all. They didn't know about Lieutenant Commander Sarah Matthews, call sign Viper. They didn't know about the 247 carrier landings, the combat missions over hostile territory, or the Distinguished Flying Cross hidden in a box under her bed. They didn't know she'd flown F-18 Hornets off the deck of the USS Ronald Reagan for 9 years. Sarah preferred it that way. The Navy had taken everything from her, her marriage, her health, her peace of mind. When she'd finally gotten out, she'd wanted nothing more than to disappear into civilian life. No more pressure. No more life or death decisions. No more 3 a.m. nightmares about engine failures over the Pacific. Just spreadsheets and tax returns and blessed anonymity. She closed her eyes and felt the gentle vibration of the engines. Flight 1842 from Chicago to Los Angeles was right on schedule. 4 hours total. She'd be home by dinner. Then the plane lurched. It wasn't much, just a small jolt, like hitting a speed bump. Sarah's eyes snapped open. Around her, passengers glanced up from their phones and tablets, then went back to what they were doing. Just turbulence. But Sarah's heart had already started beating faster. That wasn't turbulence. She knew the difference. That was something else. The plane lurched again, harder this time. A woman across the aisle gasped. The sleeping man next to Sarah jolted awake. What was that? Sarah didn't answer. She was listening. Listening to the engines, to the rush of air outside, to the subtle changes in pitch and tone that most people would never notice. Something was wrong. The overhead speakers crackled to life. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Harrison. We're experiencing some minor technical difficulties. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Flight attendants, please be seated. Minor technical difficulties. Sarah's jaw tightened. That was pilot speak for, we have a serious problem but we don't want you to panic yet. Around her, passengers were murmuring nervously. The flight attendants moved quickly down the aisles, their smiles professional but strained. Sarah watched them carefully. She saw the worry in their eyes. The plane tilted left, then overcorrected right. People grabbed their armrests. Someone behind Sarah started praying quietly in Spanish. Sarah unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. "Ma'am, please sit down," a flight attendant said immediately, rushing toward her. "I need to speak to the captain," Sarah said quietly. "That's not possible. Please return to your seat. I'm a pilot." Sarah looked the flight attendant directly in the eyes. "I know what's happening to this plane, and I can help." The flight attendant hesitated, studying Sarah's face. Whatever she saw there made her pause. What kind of pilot? The kind who lands jets on aircraft carriers in the middle of the ocean at night. The flight attendant's eyes widened. She glanced toward the cockpit, then back at Sarah. "Wait here." She hurried toward the front of the plane and picked up the intercom phone. Sarah could see her speaking urgently, glancing back at Sarah several times. The plane shuddered again, more violently this time. Oxygen masks dropped from the overhead compartments. Passengers screamed. Sarah's training kicked in immediately. Her breathing slowed. Her mind cleared. She knew this feeling, the rush of adrenaline tempered by years of discipline. She'd felt it dozens of times before, usually at 500 knots with missiles in the air. The flight attendant hurried back. "Come with me. Quickly." Sarah followed the flight attendant to the front of the plane, gripping seatbacks as the aircraft shook. Passengers stared at her with desperate, hopeful eyes, as if they somehow knew she might be their only chance. The flight attendant knocked on the cockpit door. "It's Amanda. I have someone who says she can help." There was a pause, then the door opened a crack. A sweating face peered out, the first officer, Sarah guessed. "Who are you?" "Lieutenant Commander Sarah Matthews, U.S. Navy, retired. I flew F divided by a -18s. You've got a hydraulic problem, probably catastrophic failure in your number 2 system based on the control response I'm feeling. Am I right?" The first officer's face went pale. "How did you?" "Because I've dealt with it before. Let me in." He hesitated only a second, then opened the door fully. The cockpit was chaos. Captain Harrison was wrestling with the control yoke, his face red with effort. Warning lights covered the instrument panel like Christmas decorations. Alarms were blaring. Through the windscreen, Sarah could see they were in a slow, uncontrolled descent, the nose gradually dropping despite the captain's efforts. "Who the hell are you?" Captain Harrison barked without looking back. "Someone who can help." "What have you got?" "Complete hydraulic failure in System 2. Partial failure in System 1. We're losing control authority. The plane won't respond to inputs. We're going down." Sarah stepped closer, her eyes scanning the instruments. She saw it immediately, the hydraulic pressure gauges, the control surface indicators, the altitude readout showing their descent rate increasing. They were at 38,000 feet now, losing 1,500 feet per minute and accelerating. "You're fighting it wrong," Sarah said. "You're trying to pull up, but that's making it worse. The system's stuck in a partial configuration. You need to." "I've been flying for 28 years, Captain Harrison snapped. "I know what I'm doing." "Then why are we still descending?" Sarah's voice was calm but firm. "Sir, with all due respect, you've been flying commercial jets with full hydraulic systems for 28 years. I've been flying military jets with combat damage and system failures. I know how to fly when things are broken." Captain Harrison turned to look at her for the first time. Their eyes met. In that instant, he saw something that made him pause, the absolute certainty of someone who had been here before and survived. "What do I do?" he asked. "First, stop fighting the yoke. You're creating asymmetric forces. Release pressure, now." He did. The plane's erratic movements smoothed slightly. "Good. Now, you're not going to like this, but we need to intentionally descend faster to build airspeed. Right now you don't have enough energy to control the aircraft." "That's insane," the first officer said. "We're already descending too fast." "We're descending uncontrollably," Sarah corrected. "There's a difference. We need controlled descent to build speed, then we can use that energy to level out. It's a technique called energy management. We used it in the Navy when we lost hydraulics." Captain Harrison stared at her. Around them, alarms continued to blare. The altitude readout showed 35,000 feet. They had maybe 5 minutes before they hit the point of no recovery. "If you're wrong, we all die," he said quietly. "If we keep doing what we're doing, we all die anyway. I'm giving us a chance. He took a deep breath, then nodded. Tell me what to do. First officer, kill the master caution alarm. We know we have problems. We don't need it yelling at us. The first officer hit the button. Blessed silence, broken only by the rush of wind and the strain of the engines. Captain, you're going to pitch the nose down 10 degrees. Slowly. Don't force it. Let gravity help. That's the opposite of what every instinct tells me. I know. But your instincts are trained for a functioning aircraft. This aircraft is broken. We have to work with the damage, not against it. Captain Harrison pushed the yoke forward gently. The nose dropped. Through the windscreen, Sarah watched the horizon tilt. Passengers would be feeling this, she knew. They'd be terrified. But there was no other way. The airspeed began to increase. 280 knots. 290, 300. Good, Sarah said. Now, here's the hard part. We're going to use the engines for pitch control. Increase thrust on the number 1 and 4 engines, the outboards. Leave 2 and 3 at current setting. That'll create asymmetric thrust, the first officer said. Exactly. We're going to use asymmetric thrust to generate a pitch-up moment. It's crude, but it works. Captain Harrison's hands moved to the throttle levers. This is crazy. Welcome to military aviation. Do it. He pushed the outboard throttles forward. The engines roared. Sarah felt the change immediately, a subtle pressure, like the plane was fighting against itself. The nose wanted to come up, but the damaged hydraulics were resisting. More thrust. Max power on 1 and 4. The engines screamed. The plane shuddered. And slowly, impossibly, the nose began to rise. It's working, the first officer whispered. Oh my God, it's working. They leveled out at 22,000 feet. The descent had stopped. They were flying, barely, crudely, but flying. Captain Harrison was staring at the instruments in disbelief. I don't understand. How did you know that would work? Because I did it once over the Philippine Sea when my port hydraulics blew. Had to fly back to the carrier using throttle control only. Made it back with 0 hydraulic pressure. She paused. Well, almost 0. I had about 3%. You've got less than that. Can we land like this? The first officer asked. Sarah didn't answer immediately. She was studying the instruments, running calculations in her head. Landing speed, approach angle, brake energy, runway length requirements. Maybe, she said finally. But it's going to be the roughest landing you've ever made. We'll need a long runway, every emergency vehicle in the state, and a lot of luck. Where's the nearest suitable airport? Captain Harrison asked. Sarah already knew. She'd been running through options since she entered the cockpit. Edwards Air Force Base. It's 120 miles southwest. They've got a 15,000-foot runway, the longest in the country. And they're used to weird landings. The space shuttle used to land there. Can we make it 120 miles with asymmetric thrust and basically no hydraulics? We have to. It's the only runway long enough. LAX is closer but the runways are too short. If we can't stop, we'll roll off the end. At Edwards, we've got room to work with. Captain Harrison picked up the radio. Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. This is United 1842. We have catastrophic hydraulic failure and are requesting emergency landing at Edwards AFB. The response was immediate. United 1842, this is Los Angeles Center. Confirmed catastrophic hydraulic failure. Can you maintain controlled flight? Affirmative, Center. We're maintaining flight using asymmetric thrust. We have a military aviation expert on board assisting. Requesting direct routing to Edwards and emergency equipment standing by. Roger, 1842. Edwards is being notified. You're cleared direct. Descend and maintain 15,000. Emergency equipment will be ready. Sarah looked at Captain Harrison. We need to talk about the approach. It's going to be different from anything you've ever done. For the next 20 minutes, Sarah taught 2 civilian pilots how to land an aircraft with almost no control systems. She spoke calmly, clearly, breaking down complex military procedures into simple steps. Forget everything you know about stable approaches, she said. We can't do stable. We're going to be constantly adjusting, constantly compensating. The plane is going to feel alive in your hands, like it's fighting you. Let it. Don't fight back. Guide it. How do we manage speed without hydraulics? The first officer asked. Landing gear. We'll drop it early. The drag will help slow us down. But timing is critical. Too early and we won't make the runway. Too late and we'll be going too fast to stop. Captain Harrison was writing notes, his hand shaking slightly. Sarah noticed. You've got this, she said quietly. I know it's terrifying. But you're not alone. I'll be right here. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. Why did you hide what you did? Why not tell people you were a Navy pilot? That's something to be proud of. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Because every time someone found out, they wanted to know about it. They wanted stories. They wanted to hear about combat missions and carrier landings and the exciting parts. But they never wanted to hear about the hard parts. The friends who didn't come back. The marriages that fell apart. The nightmares. She gestured at the chaos around them. This is what I did for 9 years. Life or death situations. And when I got out, I just wanted peace. I wanted to be normal. Is that so wrong? No, Captain Harrison said softly. It's not. But I'm sure as hell glad you were on this plane today. Attention passengers, this is Captain Harrison. His voice was steady now, controlled. We're going to be making an emergency landing at Edwards Air Force Base in approximately 15 minutes. Please listen carefully to the flight attendants as they prepare the cabin. Follow their instructions exactly. We have an experienced military pilot assisting us, and we're doing everything possible to ensure a safe landing. Remain calm, follow procedures, and we'll get through this together. Through the open cockpit door, Sarah could hear the activity in the cabin. Flight attendants giving instructions. Passengers crying, praying, calling loved ones. 189 people whose lives were now in her hands. She'd saved lives before. In combat. During training accidents. But this was different. These weren't fellow pilots who understood the risks. These were civilians, families, children, people who just wanted to get home. We're 20 miles out, the first officer announced. Edwards is straight ahead. Through the windscreen, Sarah could see it, the massive dry lake bed of Rogers Dry Lake, and next to it, the enormous runway where test pilots had pushed experimental aircraft to their limits for decades. Where the space shuttle had landed. Where, if they were very lucky, United 1842 would land today. Beginning descent, Captain Harrison said. Remember, Sarah said. Small inputs. Don't overcorrect. And whatever happens, keep flying the aircraft until it's fully stopped. Even if it seems hopeless, keep flying. That's what you did, isn't it? In the Navy? Every single time. Edwards Air Force Base had cleared all other traffic. Fire trucks lined the runway. Ambulances waited. The tower had been evacuated except for essential personnel. Everyone was watching. On the ground, news helicopters had already arrived, their cameras pointed at the sky, broadcasting live to millions. Sarah didn't know that yet. She was focused on the instruments, on the feel of the aircraft, on the sound of the engines. They were at 5,000 feet now, descending through light clouds. The base appeared below them, the long, straight runway looking impossibly narrow from this altitude. "Gear down," Sarah said. Captain Harrison pulled the landing gear lever. They felt the change immediately, the increased drag, the way the plane wanted to pitch forward. He compensated with more asymmetric thrust. "Gear down and locked," the first officer confirmed. "But we're only showing 2 green lights. The nose gear indicator is amber." "Doesn't matter," Sarah said. "It's down. We saw it deploy visually. Focus on what we can control." They were at 3,000 feet. The runway was growing larger in the windscreen. Sarah's eyes flicked constantly between the instruments and the view outside, calculating approach angle, descent rate, airspeed, wind correction. "You're a little right of centerline," she said. "Small left input." "Very small." Captain Harrison adjusted. The plane wobbled, overcorrected, then settled. "Good. Hold that. Descent rate is 800 feet per minute. That's perfect. 2,000 feet. They could see the fire trucks now, the flashing lights, the emergency crews watching their approach. "Airspeed 180 knots, the first officer called out. "That's fast for landing." "It has to be," Sarah said. "We need the speed for control authority. We'll bleed it off on the runway. That's why we need 15,000 feet. 1,000 feet. The runway filled the windscreen. Sarah's heart was pounding, but her voice remained calm. This was the moment. This was where years of training either saved everyone or meant nothing at all. 500 feet. Start reducing thrust on the outboards. Gently. Captain Harrison's hand moved to the throttles. The engine noise decreased slightly. The nose wanted to drop. He fought to keep it level. 400 feet. You're perfect. Hold it right there. 300 feet. I can see the numbers. 200 feet. Get ready to flare. On my mark. 100 feet. 50 feet. Sarah could see individual cracks in the concrete. Flare. Now. Captain Harrison pulled back on the yoke with all his strength. The nose came up slowly, grudgingly. For a heart-stopping moment, Sarah thought they were going to slam nose first into the runway. Then the main wheels touched down. The impact was hard, harder than any commercial landing should be. The plane bounced, came down again, bounced once more. Passengers screamed. But they were down. Thrust reversers. Sarah shouted. Captain Harrison deployed them. The engines howled in reverse. But without proper hydraulic pressure, the reversers weren't working at full efficiency. They were still going too fast, eating up runway at an alarming rate. Manual brakes. Max effort. Both of you, full pedal pressure. Both pilots stood on the brake pedals. Sarah could smell burning rubber. The plane shuddered and shook, protesting the abuse. Through the windscreen, she watched the runway markers flash by. 10,000 feet remaining. 8,000, 6,000. They were slowing, but not enough. Not nearly enough. 5,000 feet remaining. They were still going 80 knots. "We're not going to make it," the first officer said, his voice tight with fear. "Yes, we are," Sarah said. She grabbed the back of Captain Harrison's seat and leaned forward. "Kill engines 2 and 3. Now. All remaining power to reversers on 1 and 4. It was a desperate move, one that would damage the engines. But damaged engines were better than running off the end of the runway. Captain Harrison didn't hesitate. He pulled the throttle levers. The center engines wound down. He redirected all their remaining power to the outboard engines thrust reversers. The effect was immediate. The plane decelerated harder. Sarah could hear metal grinding, feel the airframe shaking like it might come apart. 3,000 feet remaining. 60 knots. 2,000 feet. 40 knots. 1,000 feet. 20 knots. 500 feet remaining when the plane finally shuddered to a stop, sitting crooked on the runway, smoke pouring from the brakes, the outboard engines making horrible grinding sounds. But stopped. Completely, totally stopped. For a long moment, nobody in the cockpit moved. They just sat there, breathing hard, staring at the runway ahead that they'd almost run out of. Then Captain Harrison started laughing. Not hysterical laughter, the deep, relieved laughter of someone who thought they were going to die and didn't. The first officer joined in. Even Sarah found herself smiling. "We did it," Captain Harrison said. "We actually did it." "You did it," Sarah corrected. "I just told you how." "Like hell. You saved 189 people today." Through the windscreen, they could see emergency vehicles racing toward them, fire trucks and ambulances surrounding the plane. The evacuation slides were already deploying. The evacuation was orderly, surprisingly so, given what everyone had just been through. Flight attendants had done their jobs perfectly, and passengers moved quickly but calmly down the slides. Minor injuries only. Some bumps and bruises from the hard landing, a few sprained ankles from the slides. But everyone was alive. Everyone was walking away. Sarah tried to leave quietly, blending in with the passengers. But Captain Harrison caught her arm. "Where do you think you're going?" "Home, eventually. After the investigators are done with us. The investigators are going to want to talk to you for a long time. You just saved a commercial aircraft using military tactics that probably aren't even in any civilian manual." He paused. "Why did you really hide what you did?" "The real reason." Sarah looked at the plane behind them, at the passengers being checked by paramedics, at the news helicopters circling overhead. She sighed. "You want the truth? I couldn't do it anymore. 9 years in the Navy, 247 carrier landings, 3 combat deployments. I lost friends. I saw things. And every single time I got in that cockpit, I knew it might be the last time. Every single landing on that carrier deck, I knew one wrong move meant I'd die." She met his eyes. "I got out because I was tired of living on the edge. Tired of the pressure. I wanted a life where the biggest stress was tax season. Where nobody's life depended on me being perfect every single time. But you were perfect today. Today I didn't have a choice. But I don't want to be that person anymore. I don't want people looking at me and seeing Lieutenant Commander Matthews. I just want to be Sarah." "I understand," Captain Harrison said. "But Sarah, people are going to find out. This landing is going to be all over the news. There's no hiding now." He was right, of course. Within hours, her name was everywhere. News channels ran the story non-stop: former Navy pilot saves commercial flight. Her military record was dug up, her service photos plastered across screens. Her phone rang constantly, reporters, former squadron mates, the Navy asking if she'd consider coming back. Her boss at the accounting firm called. "Sarah, why didn't you tell us? We had a literal hero working in our office and we had no idea." "Because I'm not a hero," Sarah said tiredly. "I just did what I was trained to do." That's exactly what heroes say. 2 weeks later, Sarah was back in Denver, trying to return to her normal routine. But nothing was normal anymore. People recognized her on the street. Clients requested her specifically because they'd seen her on TV. Other pilots contacted her, wanting to learn the techniques she'd used. The FAA launched an investigation that concluded the landing was an exceptional display of airmanship under extreme circumstances. They recommended that her approach techniques be studied and potentially incorporated into emergency training. NASA called, wanting to interview her for a study on crisis management. And the Navy called again. Admiral Patricia Wong, who had been Sarah's commanding officer years ago. "Sarah, I know you wanted out. I know you needed peace. But we need people like you training the next generation. Not to fly, to teach. To pass on what you know. Admiral, I can't. I'm not asking you to come back full-time. Just consulting. A few weeks a year. Come to Pensacola, talk to the Nuggets, show them what you showed those civilian pilots. Because what you did wasn't just about flying. It was about decision-making under pressure. About trusting your training. About stepping up when everyone else has frozen." Sarah thought about it. About the passengers on that plane, alive because she'd stepped forward. About the young pilots who might face similar situations someday. "A few weeks a year," she said finally. "And I'm still an accountant the rest of the time. Deal." 6 months after Flight 1842, Sarah stood in front of a classroom at Naval Air Station Pensacola. 20 young aviators, fresh out of flight school, about to start their fleet training, looked back at her with eager, nervous faces. "My name is Sarah Matthews," she began. "Most of you probably know me from the news. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because every single one of you is going to face an impossible situation someday. A situation where everything is broken, where all your training seems useless, where you're certain you're going to die." She walked across the front of the classroom. "And in that moment, you're going to have a choice. You can freeze. You can panic. Or you can fall back on your training and figure out a way through. The difference between those choices is the difference between life and death." A young woman raised her hand. "Lieutenant Commander, how did you stay calm? Everyone said you were completely calm in that cockpit." "I wasn't calm. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would break my ribs. My hands were shaking. I was terrified." Sarah smiled. "But I didn't let the fear control me. I used it. Fear sharpens you, focuses you, if you let it. The secret isn't not being afraid. The secret is being afraid and doing it anyway." For the next 2 hours, she walked them through the incident. The technical details, yes, but more importantly, the decision-making process. How she'd assessed the situation. How she'd communicated with the pilots. How she'd adapted military procedures to a civilian aircraft. "The most important thing I can teach you," she said at the end, "is this: never stop learning. Never assume you know everything. Those civilian pilots had decades more experience than me in that type of aircraft. But they'd never dealt with that kind of emergency. I had. And they were smart enough to listen." After the class, several students came up to talk to her. But one conversation stuck with her. A young lieutenant, barely 23 years old, approached shyly. "Ma'am, can I ask you something personal?" "Go ahead. Do you regret getting out? After everything that happened, after saving all those people, do you wish you'd stayed in?" Sarah thought about it carefully. "No," she said finally. "I needed to leave when I did. I needed that time to be normal, to heal, to figure out who I was outside of the Navy. And that's okay. Serving doesn't mean serving forever. It means serving when you're needed. But you came back. Sort of. I came back in a different way. I'm not flying anymore. I'm teaching. Sharing what I learned. That's service too, just a different kind." She looked at the young lieutenant. "The question isn't whether you stay or go. The question is, when you're needed, will you step forward? Even if you're scared. Especially if you're scared." Sarah still works as an accountant in Denver. She still lives in her modest apartment, still hikes on weekends. But now, a few times a year, she goes to Pensacola and teaches young pilots what she learned in 9 years of carrier aviation and one emergency landing that changed everything. The passengers from Flight 1842 stay in touch. They have an email chain, a group that meets annually on the anniversary of the landing. Captain Harrison retired and wrote a book about the experience. The first officer left commercial aviation and became a flight instructor, dedicated to teaching the kind of emergency procedures that saved their lives. And Sarah keeps the Distinguished Flying Cross out now, displayed on her bookshelf. Not because she wants attention, but because hiding who she was didn't make sense anymore. She was Lieutenant Commander Matthews. She was Sarah the accountant. She was both, and that was okay. Sometimes people recognize her in grocery stores or coffee shops. Usually she just smiles and nods and moves on. But occasionally, when someone asks her about that day, she tells them the truth. I was terrified. But I stepped forward anyway. And that's all any of us can do when the moment comes, step forward and do what needs to be done. Because that's what heroes do. Not because they're unafraid, but because they're afraid and they do it anyway. And somewhere, on every flight across America, there might be someone sitting in seat 23C or 12A or 34F. Someone quiet, someone who keeps to themselves, someone with skills and experience they've chosen to leave behind. Someone who, if the moment comes, will step forward. Just like Sarah Matthews did.